Okay, Amazing Polly is going to give her take on the smart cities. Now, I seen a movie, about 6 months ago. It looks something like a Google city, although it wasn't called that. I forget the name of the movie, unfortunately. And in trying to Google it, I didn't find it. But there are movies on the smart city, several of them. And so there's no accountability with the leaders of the smart city. They want to set it up like their own little government. So let's see what Amazing Polly has to say on the smart city, and let's do that with no further ado. So let's get her done. I'm going to turn around the screen. Okay, and here we go.
Today's video, I'm going to talk about smart cities. What smart cities are, how they work, or any of that. What I want to do is posit to you my idea, sort of an unformed theory, that what's happening with the rise of smart cities is kind of a reverse French Revolution. And what I really want to talk about today is inspired by an article in Quillette. What do the oligarchs have in mind for us? Their vision of what our society should look like is not one most people on the left or right would like to see. My theory is that the elite know that we're getting into French Revolution territory again, and they've learned from history.
So let's do a little research on our own. What was the French Revolution? What existed? What did they do with this French Revolution? And how are they applying that today in implementing these smart cities? Something to think about. Let's do some research.
They've donned a disguise, which is that they are the champions of the people and that they are leading the charge to upset the current paradigm of rich versus poor. If you look, though, these technological elites are they're preparing us for a world that is even more vastly unequal. And they're getting ready for us to recognize that. That's what I'm thinking. And so the smart cities are an attempt to bring humanity under control before we have another French Revolution. That's sort of my thesis in this video. Let's look at how they're selling the idea of the smart city to the public. This is Toronto's proposed smart city, which is actually a Google project. Google has a sister company called Sidewalk Labs, and that's who's overseeing this. So in Toronto, they want a 170-acre parcel of land on the waterfront, and Google wants to oversee it completely. And this guy, Eric Jaffe, works for them. So on his Twitter feed, he's always posting articles that make it sound really good. I mean, just look at the headline of this one. Cozy streetscapes and big data. And the picture features, all kinds of people on a beautiful sunny day. There's kites in the sky. Oh, so many kites. I don't know why we'll be flying so many kites in this city of the future. But you notice the subheading here. The public-corporate partnership reimagined on a huge scale. Oh yes, it's a huge scale, all right. Basically, Google wants to be the government of this city. And it admits our master innovation development plan reimagines the engagement of tens of thousands of Torontonians and their public officials. Translation, though, is that they want to put all government on blockchain and get rid of elected officials. I think their end goal is that they will collect so much data from the citizens, because in the smart cities, every single thing will be sending data back to the central hub. The concrete beneath your feet, every button you touch, it will be augmented reality. It's hard to describe just how wired the city will be. Well, it will be wireless, but you get what I mean. So I think this idea of putting government on the blockchain, in addition to making each citizen a node, will be nodes with a digital ID. I think what they'll do is they will assume nobody needs to vote because From the data, they can already tell which way you will vote on any given issue. That's my guess. So yeah, it's a big change in governance.
Now, on that note, based on data, based on human behavior, they think the possibility exists. They think that based on human behavior, they can just randomly decide for you. We change our minds all the time. We often will go in, we're heading in one direction, and we see something, we realize, wait a minute, it could be done better, it could be done like this, or no, I'm not going to do that, or I didn't like what they said, and that tells me something else about this person or this group. And so you go in another direction as an end result. So they're going to try to make the decisions for us based on data, based on possible algorithms. Really? What's wrong with this picture here? Okay. This is all wrong. And but they're playing God, see? They want to play God in doing so, and they're way out of line. So let's continue to hear what Amazing Polly has to say. And now it's going to act up, really? Oh, this isn't good. Interesting. Look at that. And I can't pause because I'm live. So let me go back. Okay. All right, let's start this over. All right, I'm going to start this over. Okay. So we're going to go to, oh boy. All right, now let's see if this doesn't start up here.
Yes, okay.
All of a sudden, this isn't playing, folks. What are they afraid of? Why don't they want this to play? Look at this. This is live. And I can't pause this.
I can't. And I have no.
Okay, you can see
Phoenix is big.
all the way through here.
Phoenix is a big airport, and Charlotte's a big airport.
Now, look at that. It just fades out. So I'm going to have to try to start this over. So bear with me here as I try to get this rebooted. And let's see what happens as I'm restarting.
Sometimes they have those things that you can
Okay, let's try it again. And we'll be taking it from the top, of course.
13
All right.
things away. It's a long way. I've had to do that.
Okay.
And then they made it through John Blaine.
Yeah.
Now, let's see.
Really?
Okay.
Love you.
Love you too.
Say,
I
have a
will
nice
be.
trip.
I will be.
Right. Basically, Google wants to be the government of this city. And it admits our Master Innovation Development Plan reimagines the engagement of tens of thousands of Torontonians and their public officials. Translation, though, is that they want to put all government on the blockchain and get rid of elected officials. I think their end goal is that they will collect so much data from the citizens, because in the smart cities, every single thing will be sending data back to the central hub. The concrete beneath your feet, every button you touch, it will be augmented reality. It's hard to describe just how wired the city will be. Well, it will be wireless, but you get what I mean. So I think this idea of putting government on the blockchain, in addition to making each citizen a node, will be nodes with a digital ID. I think what they'll do is they will assume nobody needs to vote because from the data, they can already tell which way you will vote on any given issue. That's my guess. So yeah, it's a big change in governance. Here's another one of their slides. The plan shows that inclusive, sustainable growth is achievable. And as my friend noted, anyone can write anything into a plan. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will actually come to fruition. And that is so true. It's your typical slimy salesman tactic. Just say nice things. And you'll notice here they've got these little childish looking drawings, which I think actually are pretty accurate because in this imagined smart cities, we're all going to live on top of each other. The idea in smart cities, as in the whole economy of the future, as far as the fourth industrial revolution goes, by the way, is zero ownership of anything. You won't own anything.
Zero ownership.
Everything, including your light. That's the sales pitch, right? Cozy streetscapes, fair governance, sustainable, inclusive growth. But here's a city they've already made. Now, this wasn't a smart city per se. This was a sustainable city, purpose-built for this. Masdar City in the UAE. You notice that Masdar is a Mubadala company. Here, it says the public-corporate partnership for Sidewalk Toronto. What's the definition of fascism again, the really simplified one? Isn't it the merger of corporation and state? It is. In Masdar, they gave this big sales pitch too. But look at the reality. Now, construction began in Masdar City in 2008. It was estimated for completion in 2015, but at this point, the final completion is estimated to be 2030. They said there would be no cars allowed anywhere near this thing. It would all be public transit or these pod cars. They call them PRTs. However, under a revised design, they can't use the pod cars exclusively like they had hoped. And the majority of private vehicles will be restricted to parking lots along the city's perimeter. Obviously, some of them are still going to be allowed inside. That's quite the departure from the future they promised when they sold this to the people. And finally, the original master plan for Masdar envisioned a city functioning on its own grid with full carbon neutrality. However, the development later hooked onto the public system. And by 2016, its managers determined that the city would never reach net zero carbon levels. Okay, I tell you all of that just to show you, and I know most of you already know, that these promises that they make are just lies. Basically, they are lies. The engineers and designers involved in these processes obviously know that they are not delivering realistic promises to people. If they didn't know with Masdar, they certainly would know today, and yet these organizations that are trying to build smart cities keep making the same promises that they know are bound to fail. This should be criminal. A writer in the New York Times said that basically Masdar is the culmination of the gated community concept, the crystallization of another global phenomenon, which is the growing division of the world into refined high-end enclaves and vast formless ghettos. I did too. And this is where my concept of the reverse French Revolution comes into play. At the time...
Now, think about that. They want you dependent upon them. They don't want any type of ownership. They want to own and control you. They want you needy and dependent upon them. What's wrong with this picture? Let's think again now. Let's rethink this. That's why we're watching this video today, and her link will be in the description. So let's continue to watch. Now I've got my finger here on the screen so I can, so it doesn't black out on me again. Let's restart.
The French Revolution, the peasants got so upset at the the disparity between the rich and the poor that they decided to band together and take matters into their own hands. This is the short version. And they deposed the elite. Well, let's have a look at what was happening in France, in the lead up to the French Revolution. What was the disparity like between the rich and the poor? And I'm just going to show you one little
Let's not
slice of
forget
life
the Magna
really
Carta.
amazed me when I found it. Okay, first let's look at the Palais de Versailles. This is basically the grounds. It is huge. You have to be there to understand how big this thing is and how vast. So this is the estate where Marie Antoinette and King Louis XIV, who were the monarchs at the time of the Revolution, they would go there to get away from the hustle and bustle of Paris to this vast, gigantic estate. And they were so wealthy and so disconnected from the regular people that they got bored. Of course they're going to get bored. Just like the elite billionaires, of which there are more and more concentrated wealth in fewer and fewer hands today, they get bored too. So what did Marie Antoinette do out at Versailles to cure her boredom? Well, she hopped on a trend, and that trend was that some of the elites started building fake villages on their grounds. Here's a photo of some of the buildings from Hameau de la Reine, which means the Queen's Hamlet. Here is an overhead view of it. It's quite large, but not nearly as large as some of the smart cities that are planned for today. You can see they've got little working farms, a dozen buildings or so. These included a dovecot, a boudoir, a mill, 2 dairies, a farm, a grange, a guardhouse, a tower used purely for decoration, a boudoir, a billiard room, and even a réchauffeur, which is a room dedicated solely to preparing the Queen's meals while she was visiting the hamlet. The Queen, Marie Antoinette, used to dress up as a milkmaid and go around and play with the people who worked there, because these were work. Other chateaux in the region had their own rustic follies, and it had become fashionable to take your guest out to explore the backyard farm. Does that remind you of smart cities at all? It reminds me of them, only there's one huge glaring difference. The elite of the time of the French Revolution, while clearly very pampered, seems to have affection for the common people. And they enjoyed getting their hands into the farming. They would milk the cows. They liked this. They missed that, being monarchs, being elite. With smart cities, it's kind of the opposite. They are sucking the humanity and the nature out of these areas. It doesn't matter though, and the people at that time had no idea about technology. All they saw was some queen lording it over them, collecting up their people and their habits to have sort of a human zoo, more or less, on their property. And that, of course, led to the French Revolution. The French Revolution resulted in the suppression of the feudal system, the emancipation of the individual, a greater division of landed property, abolition of the privileges of noble birth, and a nominal establishment of equality among men. Right now, the technological elites are saying that this is what they want too, but I argue it simply isn't true. In fact, I think it's more along the lines of the violent part of the French Revolution. After they beheaded the king and queen, a committee of public safety was created, which gradually became the de facto wartime government. The committee oversaw the reign of terror. The Committee of Public Safety oversaw the reign of terror. And they justified their use of this. Robespierre said that the basis of popular government during a revolution is both virtue and terror. Virtue without which terror is baneful, terror without which virtue is pointless. Terror is nothing more than speedy, severe, and inflexible justice. It is thus an emanation of virtue. Doesn't it remind you of Google's trust and safety organization? And Google's machine learning fairness algorithm, which actually suppresses speech? In this case, what we're going through right now I believe, are the elites posing as the revolutionaries. The elites are pretending to be the revolutionaries with ideas of equality, brotherhood, and justice. But let's look at the facts. We'll go back to this Quillette article by Joel Kotkin. He mentions a guy called Greg Ferenstein who interviewed 147 digital company founders, billionaires and such. He says that most oligarchs believe an increasingly greater share of economic wealth will be generated by a smaller slice of very talented or original people. Everyone else will increasingly subsist on some combination of part-time entrepreneurial gig work and government aid. That's from the mouths of the tech oligarchs themselves. To get a preview of the society the oligarchs want to create, the best place to look is where oligarchical domination is most complete, Silicon Valley. Wired Magazine's Antonio Garcia Martinez has called it feudalism with better marketing. The new aristocratic class is an inner party of venture capitalist company founders. Well below them is an outer party of skilled professionals, well paid but forced to live ordinary middle-class lives due to high prices in housing and taxes. Below them lies the vast population of gig workers, whom Martinez compares to sharecroppers in the South, with serfs responding to a smartphone prompt rather than an overseer's command. Below them is the untouchable class of the homeless, drug-addicted, or criminal. And I won't get into it right now, but they expect most of us will soothe ourselves by living in virtual reality. We will constantly be living in a fake world, and that's where we'll spend most of our money, and that's where we'll buy most of our pretend things, and that's part of the way they envision cutting down on consumption and cutting back on factory production and things like that, because increasingly we won't have real things. We're going to live in virtual reality because we're so miserable and we're so disconnected from nature and other people, and we're so monitored by the government, especially if we live in one of these smart cities. How is it going, by the way, in this progressive utopia of San Francisco and Silicon Valley? Let's have a look. Well, as recently as the 1980s, the San Jose area boasted one of the country's most egalitarian economies. But in the current boom, cost-adjusted wages for middle-class workers, Latinos, and African Americans in Silicon Valley actually dropped. Many minorities labor in the service sector jobs, such as security guard, for around $25,000 annually working for contractors. There's ever greater segregation of minority and low-income families. Workers forced into mobile home parks or sleeping in their cars, as well as some of the nation's largest homeless encampments. That's how it's playing out. Right around the area where these technological oligarchs who say they are progressives and who espouse all this politically correct stuff, that's what it looks like there. So what's their big plan? At what point are we going to start to see the benefits of their vision for an equal, fair society? At least Marie Antoinette liked what she was bringing into her city. In fact, there's a whole book written about the pleasure dairy. First, it's important a product of Marie Antoinette's frivolous imagination, as has been assumed. To the contrary, it was part of an established tradition of dairy construction in the French royal and elite gardens that began in the mid-16th century with Catherine de Medici at the court of Fontainebleau. They did it because it connected them back to the society that they were kind of excluded from. I'm not trying to make excuses for the elites of old, but I'm trying to show you the difference between the way the elites viewed the peasant classes and the lower classes back then and the way they view them today. Absolute contempt. I mean, just look at this article that just came out. Somebody that worked on this show called The Archers from the BBC has come out and said that it was a plan back then to use this show, The Archers, it was very popular, to change the public perception of farming. Archers helped destroy small communities it portrayed. the former story editor says. BBC
Destroyed.
was wrong to side with the government in allowing the show to trick farmers into
See?
following its agenda, he said. What that
Now, is that not what's going on today? Just not so blatant? And maybe it wasn't blatant then, only those in the know were aware. Kind of like today. Food for thought. We got to look past the pie in the sky and the hoopla and everything else that's going on on the forefront. What's going on behind the scenes? We got to think. America, wakey, wakey. I only have a few more minutes here to show this, and her link will be in the description. All right, no further ado.
guy was saying was they made the farmers look foolish. The small farmers were made to look backwards and stupid, and they were embarrassed. And they featured the large-scale farmers and said, this is the way to go. So technological, modernizing, getting bigger. And today, ironically, they point us at the factory farms and they say, look how cruel this is. We can't keep going with this. So now we need to start growing meat in labs. That's what they're telling us today.
All right.
It never occurs to us to say, hey, maybe we could return to what worked, the smaller family farms. The smaller farms survived the Depression and the wars. The smaller farms got the country through the hardest times. These are resilient people. This is where we should go, not lab-grown food, but we're living in, basically, the dream of this cult right here, the technocracy. And this is how it's ending up. All the while they sit and pose and tell us that they know best. Here's Eric Schmidt's vision of a smart city. That's what his vision looks like in Toronto. Contrast those two visions. Back to Quillette and talking about Silicon Valley. For all its protestations of progressive faith, the Golden State now suffers one of the highest Gini rates, the ratio between the wealthiest and the poorest among the states. Inequality is growing faster than in almost any state. It now surpasses that of Mexico and is closer to that of Central American banana republics like Guatemala and Honduras. There's even the return of medieval diseases such as typhus tied to the growing homeless encampments. We could soon even see the return of bubonic plague, although the mainstream media seems to be ready to blame this, like most ills, on climate change as opposed to failed social policy. What I want to show you now is some hope. I want to show you that we are nowhere near as far down this road as they would like us to believe.
Okay, I got it in this live stream, and I hope it's been enjoyable. We can continue this, and I'll also put her link. She has other videos of just of different varieties. Stuff to make you think. Okay, and so look for her links in the description. Bye for now. God bless, and I look forward to hear from you. And what do you think about this? Never give up, because there's always a way. And remember, she's presenting some hope here and what's coming next.